video I'm going to introduce you to the concept of seventh chords in inversion. Now, if you have already watched the video on triads and triads in inversion, then the concept here is essentially the same. Just as we can invert an interval, we can take two notes of an interval and we can present it one way up, or we can take the bottom note up an octave and place it into inversion. And just as we can do that with triads, but we have three notes, so there are more opportunities to do inversion, so the same is true with seventh chords. We simply add another note, and in adding another note we add a greater opportunity for more inversions. So let's look at what we have here. I've put up here on the board a major minor 7 chord. This is C major minor 7 chord. Again, if you understand chord symbols and chord guitar notation, again, that we've covered in an earlier video, then you'll understand that this is C7. C here referring to the actual triad, C major, and the 7, because it's on its own, referring to a minor 7. So this is C major triad with a minor 7th, C major minor 7. So that's the chord. And I've noted the bottom note. That's to say the note that is in the bass. It happens to be that in this position, where all the notes are packed together as closely as they can be, and all the notes are a third apart, which is another aspect of when they're packed together like that. We call this triadic structure because it comes from the idea of a triad. You'll remember that if we don't have the top note, then we simply have a triad, and we call this triadic structure when it's all three notes are packed together as close as they can be. And we've just added a note on the top, creating a seventh chord. So we call this triadic structure, but because the root of the chord is the lowest note, we call this root position. Right? Remember, just a review again, the notes of a chord, and indeed of a seventh chord, are as follows. We have the root, then we have the third. This is the same as for a triad, of course. We have the fifth, and then we now add the seventh. And it works under the same principle. The root is the note that the triad or seventh chord is built upon. The third is the note that is a third above that. The fifth is the note a fifth above it, and the seventh, now that we've added, is a note of seventh interval distance above the root. So we refer to these then as root, third, fifth, and seventh. And you'll notice the root is on the bottom here when it is in this particular structure, everything packed closely together, and we call that root position. Root position, major minor 7 chord, specifically a root position C major minor 7 chord, or C7. We often don't say major minor, we just simply call it C7, and we understand what we're referring to. So if that is possible, then again, as you understand the concept of inversion, if I take that lowest note and I move it up an octave, you can see I've done that here. I've taken the C that was on the bottom, moved it up an octave. Now I have a new note in the bass. I do not have a new root. This note is still the root. Doesn't matter where it is in the chord, this is the root. What we now have is the third of the chord is the lowest note. And that means that the whole chord is in first inversion. The third of the chord is in the bass. That is to say, it's the lowest note. We use that term in the bass simply to refer to the lowest note. We're saying the lowest note you're hearing, regardless of how many notes, how many times these notes are used in the chord, how many instruments you might have playing these four notes, if this is the lowest one that's sounding, if ultimately the lowest note you hear is this one, then the whole chord must be in first inversion. And as is the case with triads, this is the chord symbol for that as well. C7 is the chord / E built over E. C7 chord with E in the bass. That's all that means. And so now, again, we can move relatively quickly through the other two because the concept is the same. This time now, I have the fifth of the chord is the lowest note, and that means we are in second inversion. In case you were confused about how I got there, all I'm doing is moving the lowest note up an octave each time, and that results in me creating a new inversion. So in this case, second inversion has the fifth of the chord in the bass, C7 over G for the notation, for the guitar chord notation or jazz chord notation. And then if I keep doing this, because I have 4 notes, I can have up to 4 ways of presenting the chord. Before, if I continued, I'd take the B flat up an octave, I'd end up with C, E, G, B flat up here, which would be the same as the starting point. So there are 4 possible ways that I can present the chord. Root position, first inversion, second inversion, and as you would expect then in this case, third inversion. So we have 3 inversions and root position. 4 possible ways that the chord can be presented. And each inversion simply refers to the note that is in the bass, the note that is the lowest sounding note. Now, you should play these chords. If you can get to a piano and play any major minor 7 chord, but certainly C major minor 7 is a good one to start with, play that chord, then play it in first inversion, then second inversion, then third inversion. And if you've done the same for the triads, you will notice that they do in fact sound a little bit different each time you do it. There is a unique sound to especially this third inversion, but really to any of the inversions. And you should kind of get to know those sounds, because that's going to be part of constructing harmony and part of creating composition and using these chords to actually create music. Part of that is going to be understanding how a root position chord sounds just a little bit different from, say, a second inversion or first inversion or third inversion chord. And having an awareness of that is going to help you to create interesting chord progressions, and even to use one chord in multiple ways, so that it might be a little different if it's used in third inversion versus if it's used, say, in root position. So, the concept today, inversions of 7th chords, very similar to inversions of triads. The principle is the same. You simply have 4 notes, so you have 1 more inversion. Make sure you understand this information, and when you do, you'll be ready to move on to the next video. Thank you.